Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Caitlin Coleman, Water Education Colorado's editor of Headwaters Magazine. Thank you for joining us today for a webinar on stream management planning. The webinar complements and expands on the content of our summer issue of Headwaters, which is also focused on stream management planning. Find the magazine and learn more about us at watereducationcolorado.org. I have a couple of notes before we get started. The webinar will last for about an hour. As attendees, you'll be muted throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please type them into the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar, which should be on the side of your screen. We'll take 2 breaks for questions, one halfway through the presentation and the other at the end. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded, so I'll email a link to you next week. And with that, let's get started. So as most of you probably know, Colorado is in the midst of a stream management planning boom with efforts most supported by state funding underway across the state. But most of those plans are just getting started. However, Steamboat Springs is one of only 4 or 5 communities with a completed plan. And having wrapped up their planning this summer, it's one of the freshest plans. So today we're going to hear about Steamboat's process and what comes next. We're joined by 3 panelists involved with this stretch of the Yampa River and with the plan. We have Kelly Romero-Heaney with the City of Steamboat Springs, Seth Mason with Lodic Hydrological, and Mickey O'Hara with the Colorado Water Trust. So we'll start off by hearing from Kelly, who will briefly walk us through Steamboat's initial planning process and then speak again later about implementation. As the Water Resources Manager for the City of Steamboat Springs, Kelly strives to integrate the diverse water demands of a community that relies on the river for its municipal and recreational needs while supporting the unique ecosystem of a free-flowing river. Kelly, you should have control to flip through your slides.
Okay, great, thank you. Again, I'm the Water Resources Manager for the City of Steamboat Springs, and those of you that don't know Steamboat or haven't been here, we're a resort community in Northwest Colorado. Usually people move here for the winter and for the skiing, but I like to think that they stay here for the river. And of course, the river that flows through our community is the Yampa River. And the Yampa River, of course, is very unique. It's one of course, we all refer to it as one of the last free-flowing rivers, although there are some smaller storage projects on the upper part of the Yampa River, including Stagecoach Reservoir, which has about 36,000 acre-feet of storage. But the Yampa doesn't have any major trans-basin diversion reservoirs, which makes it unique. Generally in the summer, the river doesn't get below 100 CFS, although this year that certainly hasn't been the case. And also in 2012, that wasn't the case. You know, one thing that we've taken for granted in the Yampa is that we have a healthy watershed, a healthy river. We promote that, but we realize that we don't entirely understand how healthy it is, or how do we measure healthy, and also how do we preserve that health into the future. We really came to realize that we needed to do that during the drought of 2012. Those of you that were in Colorado in 2002 remember we had an incredible drought. Our river dropped below 17 CFS in the summer. We certainly saw quite an impact on the aquatic life and on the river health overall. Fast forward to 2012, and we had a similar year. The river was trending in the same direction, but that year, the Colorado Water Trust stepped in to really save the day, and I will let Mickey talk about that a little bit later. Out of that 2012 year came our first 303D impaired water body listing for temperature on the Yampa River. So it led us to ask that question, you know, is our river warming? And if it is there anything that we can do about it? You know, another thing that makes Steamboat and the Yampa Valley community unique is we do have a particularly strong environmental ethic, and I would say that people are pretty supportive of protecting river health, as evidenced by a community survey that the city put out that asked community members to rate the importance of certain core services that the city provides. And if you look, and I know that it's a little bit tough to read, but if you look where it, with the big red box, it says the importance of Yampa River health management. So 88% of the respondents said that that is essential or very important. In fact, they even said that it was more important than police services or even sewer services, which is a little ironic because sewer services are particularly important to the health of the Yampa River. So you layer all of that on top of the fact that the Colorado Water Plan set a goal to put stream management plans in place on 80% of the prioritized streams in Colorado. So the city and its partners really saw this as an opportunity, particularly since the CWCB had provided funding through the Watershed Restoration Grant to conduct a stream management plan. So we applied for those funds. We got matching funds from the Basin Roundtable, the city pitched in, Routt County, and the local Trout Unlimited chapter, Yampa Valley Fly Fishers, all pitched in, and certainly there was a great deal of in-kind work that was pitched in to make this project happen. So we used that funding to hire a consultant team of Acclivity Resources. Julie Baxter was the project manager, and she has a planning background, which proved to be very useful. And then, of course, Seth Mason, who you'll hear from in a moment, and Mark Beardsley with Ecometrics also worked on the project. Just a project overview, we decided to look at a relatively small reach of the Yampa River, especially since this was one of the first stream management plans, and it was one that we figured would be manageable. And so we looked at the Yampa River from the Chuck Lewis State Wildlife Area down to the city's wastewater treatment plant, about a 10-mile reach. And our ultimate goal of the project was to develop a long-term strategy for improving health and resiliency of the Yampa River in the face of changing future climatic conditions and water use demands. Our original objective was to identify target flows that would support river health and community needs, and then prioritize actions to help meet those objectives. I would say that the project evolved and we went beyond just looking at target flows, but also just other health, stream health targets and how we could meet those. We really wanted data-driven analysis and tons of stakeholder input and certainly community buy-in, but it was that stakeholder input that was really helpful. And then to have something that was actionable at the end of the project. With that stakeholder engagement, and we used a multi-tiered approach. We had an advisory committee that really informed the process every step of the way. You can see on the slide to the right the entities that were represented on the advisory committee. And then we did targeted outreach to certain stakeholder groups, and then to community-wide meetings. Through that outreach and the guidance of the advisory committee, we came up with plan goals, which included preserving and enhancing healthy aquatic and riparian habitat, meeting regulatory responsibilities, including water quality and temperature standards, building upon existing information to develop a science-based assessment of the river system, establishing an integrated and flexible management strategy, protecting a strong local economy, and fostering a culture of shared stewardship on the Yampa River. With that, I'll turn it over.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So next, I'd like to introduce Seth Mason. And Seth, I think you may need to input your audio pin to be able to speak. But as you work on that, I'll introduce you. So Seth is the principal hydrologist at Lodic Hydrological, a consulting firm based in Carbondale, Colorado, that is dedicated to providing clients with data, tools, and interpretations necessary to inform science-based decision-making in public policy development and natural resource management. Recent projects have had him working with city and county governments, federal agencies, and 501c3 organizations on a variety of watershed, land use, water quality, and water quantity issues. Seth, are you able to speak?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Great.
Okay, great.
You should be able to flip through your slides now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. As Kelly mentioned previously, we worked very closely with Mark Beardsley at Ecometrics to execute the technical aspects of this planning effort. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes speaking about the assessment methodologies and frameworks that we use to characterize ecological conditions on the Yampa River and communicate results as well as management recommendations back to stakeholders and to the city of Steamboat. So our first task was to break up the assessment area into geomorphologically and ecologically similar reaches. And you can see those delineations here on this map outlined in the white boxes. Each reach exhibited relatively homogeneous channel characteristics, riparian conditions, and or streamside land uses. Our next go. The bulk of the phase of work involved characterizing the condition of these various ecosystem indicators that you see here on this slide for each reach. So for each reach that you saw delineated previously, we went through and did an assessment of the flow regime, sediment regime, water chemistry, floodplain connectivity, riparian condition, inputs of organic material, morphology, resilience of the system, the physical structure, and the biotic structure of the system, and generated some scorings for each of those ecological indicators individually, and then a reach average condition. So some of the assessment methodologies that we used to investigate these various indicators were quantitative and some were qualitative, but each in the end required this mapping of results, qualitative or quantitative results, onto this simple grading scheme, this A through F academic grading scheme that promoted really easy communication with a non-technical group of stakeholders and the public at large. And so get the next slide here. So the deliverable, the primary deliverable from this initial phase of work was a series of reach report cards that contained visual representations of river health and the corresponding drivers or stressors that we believed were causing that degradation. And so on the left side of the slide here, you see those that visual color bar mapping of the A through F grading scale to these various ecosystem indicators for this particular reach of the Yampa River. And then the gray box matrix that you see on the right-hand side is where we indicated the various stressors that we believe were driving those conditions. One of the things that popped out right away, this is something that Kelly mentioned, is certainly something that the city had its eyes on before we even started the planning effort, were these regular exceedances of the water temperature standard for this section of the Yampa River that's meant to protect aquatic life. This condition was evident in most of the study reaches and presents some significant issues both for local fisheries management as well as wastewater treatment plant operation and permitting for the city of Steamboat. And so what you're seeing here in the straight stair-stepped red line is the water quality standard for water temperature for this section of the Yampa, and then the purple, green, and blue lines are the temperature patterns across several years. And you can see how there's a period in each summer where the temperatures in the river go above the standard, the state standard. So in order to understand the driving forces behind these exceedances, we developed a pair of temperature models. One was a regression-based model. The other was a physical energy balance model. Our regression models used upstream water releases from Stagecoach Reservoir, time of year, and weekly average air temperature to predict a maximum weekly average water temperature. These models achieved a good fit to the observed data. You can see that in the charts here. We've got the observed temperature data in black and the simulated temperature data in blue. So we felt comfortable with the strength and predictive power of our model. And some of the results indicated that in some locations and sometimes each summer, significant releases of water would be required to push temperatures back down below the state standard. And what you're seeing here in the upper heat map is an indication of the probability of an exceedance occurring. So the red colors, you've got a higher probability of an exceedance occurring, and then you've got the stream flow of the Yampa River on the vertical axis. So you can see, in order to get out of the red colors at various points in this particular summer that we've simulated here, you're talking about hundreds of CFS, and we know in drought years the Yampa River in this location is nowhere near 300, 400, 500 CFS. So it would take significant amounts of water in order to push temperatures all the way down below the standard. That's not to say that releases have no effect on water temperature, just that the desired outcome for releases needed some tweaking. And Kelly mentioned that at the outset of this project, the city was really looking for flow targets. When faced with results like this, we realized that a flow target of 600 CFS on July 21st probably was unrealistic and wasn't really going to get very far with the folks that needed to make calls on how to allocate resources to buy water, for example. And so we had to kind of reframe how we thought about this particular issue. The other model that I mentioned was a physical model. We developed this model to test not only the outcomes of potential water releases from Stagecoach Reservoir as a means for mitigating elevated temperatures through Steamboat, but also evaluated the effectiveness of riparian restoration on those water temperature patterns as well. What we saw from the results were similar outcomes to the regression model. There are certain periods of year where flow releases don't seem to be particularly effective, at least in the range of releases that we were simulating here. And that riparian restoration, widespread restoration of the riparian corridor, getting large woody vegetation reestablished along the Yampa, actually might be as effective or more effective than flow releases in many locations. So this is an important outcome and led to some thinking about strategic prioritization of land for riparian restoration and or protection. That was one of the major deliverables for this project. And the other was a set of tables. A set of tables that look like this one. This is not a very interesting table, but it's a table that we generated for the City of Steamboat and for the Colorado Water Trust that helps them understand for a given flow in the river and a given day of the year, what temperatures they might expect to see in the river, what water temperatures they might expect to see in the Yampa River. And so you can use this table as a means for making some decisions about how much water you might think about leasing from Stagecoach Reservoir in order to bring temperatures down into a range that you feel comfortable with. And I believe Mickey is going to talk a little bit more in depth about the temperature management strategies. This is not the only line of investigation for this larger planning effort, but is certainly one of the more interesting lines. And if you're so inclined to understand the details of the other methodologies that we employed here, then I think picking up a copy of the plan and diving into the appendices is a great place to start. Thanks for your time.
Great, thanks, Seth. So we're going to take a quick pause here for a few minutes and answer a first round of questions if anybody has any. Seth is going to have to hop off a little bit early, so this is your chance to ask him questions. So if you join the webinar late, you can ask questions by typing them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll wait a second and see if anybody has any questions for Seth and Kelly to begin with. And then we'll take another question break at the end of our webinar if you don't have anything right now. So we do have one question in. It's from Jojo La. She asks, I'm curious about how or if in the biology assessment, how protection of endangered fish critical habitat was considered.
Yeah, we did do a lot of thinking about both native fish and sport fish. It's always tricky in these planning settings to talk about native fish, endangered fish, and sport fish together, because oftentimes the management considerations for one might be direct opposition or some opposition to the necessary management considerations for the other. One thing that we were very aware of and had a lot of discussions about with both members of the advisory committee as well as the city with Kelly was the fact that many of the native fish need a couple different things. They need to have opportunities to access cool water habitats in times of drought. If you're thinking about mountain whitefish, then the issues on the main stem Yampa that are relevant to mountain whitefish are connectivity opportunities or connectivity issues with the tributaries right in the city of Steamboat. And so some of the management recommendations that came out of this planning effort were to really think harder about tributary systems, the way that diversion infrastructure on those tributaries might currently limit the ability for native fishes on the main stem to access those habitats. We know that when water temperatures get warm in the Yampa, that there are groups of whitefish and sportfish alike that hang out at the mouths of the tributaries and try to access that cool water, but there are currently barriers in those systems. So that's something that we considered. We also thought a lot about habitat needs for juveniles and spawning fish, native fish, and how those needs actually inconveniently overlap with the desirable habitat conditions for some non-native invasive species like northern pike. And so that pointed to the need for some harder thinking about manual or ongoing thinking about manual eradication and removal of species like northern pike from the reaches of the Yampa River right above town.
Thanks. And we have one other question, if we can answer it quickly. Did you use an average climate year for your dynamic temperature model? And did you try to account for future scenarios considering climate change?
The quick answer is we were using the average current conditions. We were not projecting future climate conditions with those models, but that's certainly something that you could do.
Excellent. And we have time for one more question. So were options for reducing temperatures other than stream flows and shade trees within the riparian zone considered or explored?
We thought conceptually about other ways that you might reduce stream temperatures, namely wetting out the floodplain, encouraging some returns of cooler groundwater later in the summer, but we did not have enough data on groundwater temperatures or rates of recharge or hydraulic conductivity through aquifer soils to really make any conclusive statements about that as a management option. Although in concept, it certainly could be.
Great, thank you, Seth. So I think those are all the questions I'm seeing right now. If anybody else has questions for Seth, am I right that you're hopping off right now?
I am, yeah. I apologize.
Okay.
But I'm available
via
email to contact later.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
And we'll get back to our presentations, moving over to Mickey O'Hara with the Water Trust. So let's see. There's Mickey. So Mickey is a water resources engineer at the Colorado Water Trust, where he focuses on the development, implementation, and stewardship of projects that restore flows to Colorado's rivers in need. And Mickey, you should have control to flip through your slides now.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Let's see. There we go. So for those of you who haven't heard of the Colorado Water Trust, we are a nonprofit organization with the mission of restoring flows to Colorado's rivers in need. We are based in Denver, Colorado, but we work across the state, and we've been around since 2001. We are primarily focused on water transactions, which is what originally brought us up to the Yampa Basin. So I'm going to chat, I guess, in a little bit different style than Kelly and Seth have talked about this. I'm going to try to talk from the perspective of the Water Trust as a stakeholder in this process. We initially got involved in the Yampa River in 2012 in response to the drought conditions up there, and worked with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, who owns and operates Stagecoach Reservoir, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board to develop and implement the first ever short-term lease of water rights to in-stream flow in the state using a statute that was developed in response to the 2002 drought. So the photo on the screen right now is the in-stream flow reach downstream of Stagecoach Reservoir. That was the receiving reach for these releases. We initially contract with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, and then through a subcontract are able to lease that water to the CWCB for in-stream flow use. So in 2012, we were able to jump in and make those releases for in-stream flow. Now, this project has evolved over time. In 6 of the last 7 years now, the Water Trust has contracted with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District and made releases downstream, both to in-stream flow and also to the city of Steamboat Springs for non-consumptive municipal use at their wastewater treatment facility. So there are a lot of water uses in the Upper Yampa Basin, from agriculture to municipal supply, and obviously, as you see here, recreation. This is the confluence of Fish Creek and the Yampa River in downtown Steamboat Springs. And that structure you see there, actually, I believe, is the upstream-most structure in the city's recreational in-channel diversion. So if you've been up to Steamboat this summer, you've probably seen these signs. These were out in 2012 as well. In 2012, the Water Trust releases were able to hold off a recreational closure on the river and keep it open over the 4th of July holiday, which is really important for that community from an economic standpoint. Now, these signs should be an indication of just how stressed aquatic life can be in that river. I can tell you the city and Colorado Parks and Wildlife do not take the decision to close the river lightly. These fish are really stressed, and these releases do provide benefits to those fish, despite potentially not reaching state standards, as Seth previously mentioned. So in response to these needs, we've released nearly 11,000 acre-feet of water out of Stagecoach Reservoir since 2012. For anyone that doesn't speak water, that's over 3.5 billion gallons, but I'm guessing most people on this webinar do. Here's a quick hydrograph from 2012. You can see coming through June, flows were cratering on the Yampa and Steamboat Springs, and right towards the end of June there is when the water trust releases bumped up and slowed that descent down to, I guess we turned it around right above 40 CFS. So able to keep some more water in the river that year, and that's led to a lot more success over the years and a bunch of different iterations. I mentioned we do subcontract that water to downstream users. We have been able to use that water officially for in-stream flow in 3 years. In the other 3 years, we have not been able to do that. So we have subcontracted with the city of Steamboat. We have also subcontracted with Tri-State Generation and Transmission, and we have subcontracted with the city of Hayden as well, though we have not made deliveries to that point. So how does this relate to the stream management planning effort in Steamboat? That was kind of the quick background of how we ended up as a stakeholder in this process. Zach Smith was invited to participate in the advisory committee for the stream management planning process. And then we also are largely involved on the implementation side of things. And this is really where we would like to be involved in future efforts as well, but it's been an interesting experience working through this with the city of Steamboat, being a pre-existing stakeholder and coming in to the middle of the process, and then also kind of on the tail end of the process to try to figure out our implementation steps. So the priority actions that came out of the stream management plan that the Water Trust is involved in, is we will continue to seek contracts with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, both to meet in-stream flow needs and the city's stream flow objectives. The science that went into the stream management plan has informed our project already this year and will continue to do so in the future, probably on a higher level. But even just this year, the Division of Water Resources is relying on some of Seth's temperature modeling work and the science that went into the stream management plan to help administer these releases down to their point of delivery at the wastewater treatment facility. This project has gotten more and more sophisticated, and the stream management plan is certainly a big piece of that today. We work really closely with a number of partners up there, including Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, the City of Steamboat, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Fish and Wildlife Service, Tri-State, Catamount Metropolitan District, Trout Unlimited, TNC, and the list goes on. And so this has been kind of a neat evolution of our project up on the Yampa. The second piece of how we were involved in the stream management plan is we did some consulting work for the city of Steamboat Springs to review a portion of their water right portfolio to see if we could find some options for projects, potential projects that could both achieve their management objectives and restore stream flow to potentially water short streams or help in the management objectives related to the main stem Yampa River under this plan. So we completed a report for them earlier this year. We will continue to work with them on developing any of those projects they wish to move forward with. And the third piece of this is we will continue kind of water trust business as usual up in the Yampa Basin. And that means exploring other voluntary market-based stream flow restoration opportunities. We will continue to engage the local ag community, the Community Ag Alliance, potentially CSU Extension, other local stakeholders to just have a conversation about how, you know, we may consider moving forward with those ideas in the future. And so I want to give a quick recap. You saw the 2012 example, but this is just a hydrograph I pulled off of the Yampa River below Stagecoach Reservoir. So you can see flows dropped out of Stagecoach kind of towards the beginning of July down to 40 CFS, and then water trust releases began on July 14th, bumped up again on August 3rd, I believe, and then continued through August. You can see that big bump in the hydrograph. That was the Tri-State Generation and Transmission release of 70 CFS. And then after that, you can see it's kind of been managed on kind of a shorter time step, and that's because Tri-State is working to get the amount of water they need down to their station in Craig. We have been making some releases in that time period, but the city has also stepped in And the city is currently releasing some of their water in Stagecoach on top of Tri-State's water to try to maintain these releases through the remainder of the season here. So the stream management plan was really a great opportunity to help this project mature. It opened the door to more data collection and refinement of our project approach as a stakeholder. And it really helped us better understand the community's needs related to these releases. So we were really excited to be included in the process. And with that, I think I will pass it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Mickey. All right, so I'm going to kind of go back a little bit to what Seth was talking about when he presented on the method that we used to develop the stream health assessment, and then what came out of that. So the results of the stream health assessment combined with the findings from the Water Trust and the stakeholder input, guidance from the advisory committee, we came up with management objectives. And a lot of these really are geared towards preserving and protecting the good thing that the Yampa River already has going for it. So you can see some of these are, for example, maintaining the natural flow regime, maintaining and improving natural form and processes, promoting a self-reproducing sport fishery, and you guys can look through the list of those objectives. Our intent was to set objectives with measurable targets that we could monitor over time, and to develop an action item strategy to help meet these objectives. So with that, our implementation strategy was multi-tiered. We identified activities that are already occurring that should be continued to help to meet those objectives. Also identified some action items that may be lofty efforts into the future, but maybe the capacity and resources are limited to implement them today. But then we identified about 14 action items that were top tier priority to kick off within the next 2 years. And we developed those. There's multiple categories of action items, so everything from land and stream restoration to water management to different policy items and education. And so I won't go through each of the action items that we identified, but I'll just kind of chat about some highlights. Seth discussed the importance of restoring the riparian habitat along the Yampa River. And it's interesting, if you look at the temperature data from, and those of you that know Steamboat, from below Lake Catamount down to the Chuck Lewis State Wildlife Area, you can see significant spikes with the daily max temperature. You also, there's very limited canopy cover, the cottonwood trees, to shade the river through that stretch. And that kind of continued on through sections of the stream management plan reach. And so we've identified as one of our top tier projects a Yampa River forest restoration effort. In fact, the city is in the process of seeking grant funds and budgeting to implement this effort, and really teaming up with a program called RETREE, which is managed by the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council here in Steamboat. They coordinate volunteer groups, particularly youth, on planting trees throughout the Yampa Valley area, but particularly on the riparian corridor. So we're hoping to really focus those efforts and be strategic with that. And we're also hoping that grantors and funders just can't say no to kids planting trees on the river. So you better believe this picture that you all are looking at has made its way into a number of PowerPoint presentations and grant applications. Other action items, we're looking to work with the Basin Roundtable to develop a Yampa River specific curriculum for K through 12, and one that can really help to foster that stewardship of the Yampa. Also, certainly Mickey chatted about the water contracts, Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, and that has really emerged as a top tier project because water combined with trees might be an excellent tool for us to bring down stream temperatures, and certainly there's other benefits to the aquatic life and the people that use the river with that management strategy. Another action item identified was for the city to take a closer look at its own water body setback standards. Again, the city of Steamboat's quite fortunate in that much of the riparian corridor upstream from town is conserved. It's either in the city's open space program or Colorado Parks and Wildlife conservation easements, Yampa Valley Land Trust easements. But with that said, there's still some opportunity to protect some of the tributary areas and whatnot. And so the city's hoping to take a closer look at those water body setback standards for development. And then we identified several action items to really help to build long-term capacity into stream management plan implementation. None of this can be accomplished without funding and resources. And we've been really fortunate in that the Nature Conservancy has stepped in to really help to facilitate a process in partnership with the Yampa Valley Community Foundation to see if we could set up a water fund for the Yampa River Basin that could really help to fund stream management plan implementation and other watershed health type projects into the foreseeable future and on a sustainable level. And especially when you look at the riparian forest restoration project, we could plant trees for a year, but if we don't have the resources to be long-term stewards of the riparian corridor, then it's really tough for that to really help benefit the river for the long term. And the other piece is we looked at just setting up a city stream team, which would be kind of an internal team of city staff that could convene when projects or issues come up that relate to river health, so that we can really pull together the subject matter experts that we have in-house. We're a small city, so we have limited resources, but being able to kind of put our brains together, we hope that we can really make good decisions, or at least guide City Council to make good decisions for the Yampa River. And then before I move on from that, I just want to give a quick update on where we're at with the stream management plan. It was adopted by our City Council 2 weeks ago on August 28th, and so it's finalized. And there's a website that you can go to on our city webpage that will has a link to all of the reports and appendices. And as we look forward, we're really hoping that we can continue to partner with other stakeholders. The city stepped up to do the stream management plan because certainly we benefit from it. We have an interest in it. We had at least some capacity, organizational capacity, to implement it to develop it and implement it. But ultimately, the city of Steamboat city limits covers 9.9 square miles, and there's a 636 square mile watershed that contributes to it. So we've recognized that this is truly just a vehicle to help forge those partnerships and get us all moving in the same page, because the city has limited control over the health of the river ultimately, and we all just absolutely have to work together. So anyway, that's all I have, Caitlin.
All right, thank you, Kelly, and thanks, Mickey. So I'm going to turn back to you guys to answer questions. So if you are listening into the webinar and you joined late, you can pose questions by typing them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar dashboard located on the side of your screen. And we have a few already, quite a few already. Let's see. So one question, how did interactions with stakeholders change the objectives the city thought would be priorities?
That's a great question. It's interesting because, as Mickey mentioned, certainly the river is a strong economic driver, You know, the recreational use of the river is incredibly important, whether it be boating during peak flows or tubing during the summer. But ultimately, we did find that our community is primarily focused on maintaining the health of the Yampa River. And then recreation, I guess, would be second to that. And so it really pushed us to make some or identify some action items, and kind of some of the action items that were already occurring to really continue to work on those. Like, for example, you know, the city's working to modify its criteria for river closures during low flow years. And so I would say maybe it was that kind of feedback or affirmation that, you know, river health is first and foremost, but certainly we also love to play on the Yampa River, you know, as long as there's ample water to do so.
Then Kelly, another question for you. Can you describe the extent to which the ag community was involved in the development of the plan and their role in ongoing implementation? Was there significant ag buy-in in the stream management planning process?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And it actually is a really tricky part of stream management plan development, because ranchers are busy, and I'll say, you know, and especially in the Steamboat Springs area, we don't have a whole lot of owner-operators left. And so it's largely, you've got ranch managers that are operating, you know, some of the ranches, at least closer to the city of Steamboat Springs. And so we worked closely with the Community Agriculture Alliance, a local organization that really works to engage the agricultural community, and then also with the CSU Extension, just to get some guidance on, hey, what is the best way to understand what their needs are, their concerns are, their fears, their interests. And we found that you know, those folks don't really have time to come to meetings, and so you really have to go to them. And that really, you know, as long as we're being mindful and checking in with the Ag Alliance and the CSU Extension, making sure that we're not setting any objectives that would be in direct conflict with agriculture, that it's when we get into the implementation stage, we really just can invite the agricultural community to voluntarily participate, whether it be through the riparian forest restoration effort or any kind of water leasing program. But again, it was all very voluntary. So that's how we work with the agricultural community.
And then we have a couple more questions about stakeholders. So one, are all stakeholders aligned with regard to the importance of the implementation action items? And are there any individual stakeholders or groups of stakeholders who are not bought into the stream management plan, and what should be priority implementation items?
Well, I don't know that you would ever have every stakeholder aligned. You know, we didn't receive a lot of, I can't really think of, you know, a whole lot of negative feedback. I think once somebody participated and they kind of understood the context, they were on board, and whether it be at our community workshops or the comments that we received. But again, you never know if every stakeholder is aware of the planning effort. We did the best we could to do outreach far and wide between radio ads and newspaper articles and community workshops and stakeholder events and city council meetings and roundtable meetings and county commissioner meetings. But ultimately, we didn't really get too much negative feedback. I think the main thing was just the concern around whether the stream management plan would lead to increased river closures that could impact the recreational operators, the tubing operators.
Mickey, can you explain more specifically what you mean by subcontracting with downstream users? Is the Water Trust entitled to use water in Stagecoach Reservoir held by subcontractors that those subcontractors don't need?
Yeah. So the way these releases work out of Stagecoach is somewhat complex. We are limited by a couple things, one being Upper Yampa's hydropower permit with FERC. And then we're also limited by our downstream users. So we do have to deliver that water to a beneficial use downstream, and that is determined by the Division of Water Resources. So our beneficial uses in the past, first that water is released out of Stagecoach Reservoir for hydropower production. It is then subcontracted to downstream users, and to date those have included the CWCB for their in-stream flow reach down below Stagecoach Reservoir, the City of Steamboat Springs for non-consumptive municipal use at their wastewater treatment facility or at their recreational in-channel diversion, and Tri-State Generation and Transmission for use at their Craig Station. So no, we're not allowed to contract water to downstream users that don't need it. They have to be able to use it beneficially for us to be able to subcontract that and for DWR to deliver it.
Thanks. Do the recreational in-stream flow rights of the city impact the target flows, or are they too junior in a low flow year to matter?
You know, one challenge with the RISD is that it only goes through August 15th. And so while it could provide a delivery mechanism for releases out of Stagecoach up until that point, beyond that, it's no longer in effect. But certainly recreation continues, river health needs continue, fishing, angling needs continue beyond August 15th. And so it kind of had its limitations in that sense. And as a water right in of itself, it is relatively junior in the basin. And so even if the city were to say place a call on the RISD before August 15th, it may or may not result in additional flow in the Yampa. Admittedly, we haven't placed a call yet to know that for sure, though.
Okay, thank you. So we have two more questions that have come in about cost. So the first is about the cost of the plan. What is the cost to prepare the plan, and what is the cost to implement the plan based on recommendations? And the second question kind of piggybacks off of that one, so I'll read it at the same time. Did the plan cost out all the implementation activities up front? And if so, what will be the source of the funds?
Yeah, so the cost is we had budgeted for the development of the plan, including some in-kind match from the city. It was $109,000. We ended up going a little bit over budget, something about $125,000. I would say that we way under budgeted, like big time. And I think that we were one of the first stream management plans, so we didn't entirely understand what we were getting ourselves into. We hired a bunch of overachievers, which were fabulous. And I wish that Seth were still on the line to hear me say that. But I would say anybody that's going to be working on a stream management plan, make sure you have plenty of budget, plenty of time, and that you're reasonable with your scope and really think through that. And then in terms of, and I guess one other thing, just when it comes to capacity, I think it was really helpful to have the city be the entity that was kind of facilitating the development of the stream management plan, just because we already had capacity, kind of. I mean, I ended up being pretty busy, because I would say you could spend at least a quarter of your time just coordinating and facilitating the stream management plan. And then in terms of the cost of implementation for the plan itself, we actually, if you go to the website and you can kind of open up our implementation strategy, it kind of outlines that, and each action item has different costs tied to it, and it kind of depends on whether it's an ongoing cost or per year. I'll say, like, for example, we're looking at a budget of $175,000 over 3 years for the forest restoration, Yampa River Forest Restoration Project. I would say water leasing generally could be looking at $50,000 a year. And then you can start to get in some of the bigger items if you're looking at watershed scale improvements. but at least for those first two projects, the water leasing and the river forest restoration, we have a better handle on what those costs are. And we're hoping to really tie together the, some city resources, leverage with other community resources, roundtable funds. Hopefully, like for example, we're applying for a water supply reserve fund grant through the roundtable, but ultimately really looking to a sustainable funding source in the water fund, the Amber River Water Fund, if that happens, so that at least we can have some matching funds for some of those other grants. So it's just really cobbling together grants and funds and contributions, and then government budgets.
Do you have any kind of a timeline or next steps for the water fund if that does happen?
Yeah, and I think I would probably defer to the Nature Conservancy, who's really leading that effort. We're just a stakeholder in that, but they just completed the feasibility assessment, and then we're moving into the design phase over the next maybe I can't remember, maybe around 3-4 months, something along those lines, with the hope that we can start fundraising for that next year.
Great. We don't have any more questions from folks on the line, but if you guys have if Mickey and Kelly, if you two have any final thoughts about lessons learned or what might be useful for folks working on stream management plans in other parts of the state, I would love to hear those.
Again, like I said, just make sure that you budget plenty and you make sure that you've got capacity to develop these plans. I think it was good that somebody asked a question about engaging the agricultural community. I mean, they have, they're the stewards of the land and the water, so you have to engage them one way or another. But sometimes, like, our way of engaging people, especially as like city government, doesn't always work for folks that work in the field all the time. And so kind of finessing that engagement, I think, is critically important, and making sure that you're not alienating any of your partners.
Yeah, I would just echo basically what Kelly had to say. Looking a little bit from the outside on the stream management planning process, but having been involved in this one and others, it's really important to identify those folks in the community early on that you can connect with and get on board as stakeholders. And a big piece of that we've learned through our experience around the state is kind of meeting people where they stand. So it sounds like Kelly's walking away with that after this experience, and I would just encourage folks to think about that on the front end as well and get those people involved in discussions as early as possible.
All right, thank you both. If anybody has other questions, feel free to email them to me or to our panelists, and we'll try to get them answered. Again, we encourage you to take the next step by checking out Water Education Colorado's Headwaters magazine and our website for original reporting and other upcoming events and opportunities, and of course, check out our panelists' websites. I'll follow up with you guys with a link to the recording of the webinar, along with any resources that our panelists wish to share next week. And of course, thank you very much to our wonderful presenters, and thank you to everyone in the audience for your participations and great questions. This concludes our webinar. Thanks.
Thanks.